everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Al Pacino's Prison Scene, the podcast where we look at movies that objectively have no deeper meaning, and we think about it. As always, I'm your host, Thomas Butler, and with me is my co-host, Jake Ferrier.
We're the great detectives. We're the great detectives.
That is right, Jake. We are the greatest detectives, and that is, of course, because today we are discussing the 2004 masterpiece that is Scooby-Doo 2: Monsters Unleashed.
All right, I will say this with 100% confidence. Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed is the best movie ever. I love this movie so much.
I don't know about that, but this movie definitely has a special place in my heart. And, well, first of all, Scooby-Doo, I think, is one of the greatest franchises of all time. No contest. You can't argue with me with that. That's a fact. And this movie being the
Yes.
second and only of four, I believe, live-action Scooby-Doo movies, that's a pretty good feat, I think, for this to be of such a substantial franchise. But I did grow up with this movie. There is one before this, Scooby-Doo. I don't like that one as much as this one. There's just something about this one. There's some certain charm about this one that I just love so much.
I mean, let's give love to Scrappy-Doo, though. I mean, he's a great character. And then Rowan Atkinson in the first one.
They are great, but I don't think they hold a candle to monsters coming to life as they do in this movie. So with that, I'm going to lead into the recap, and it's been a few days since I've seen this, so this recap might be a little rusty, but here we go. So the movie opens with kind of a POV shot, but not really, of the pterodactyl ghost, and he's flying through Coolsville, trying to make it to the exhibit where the Mystery Inc. gang is. And in this exhibit is all the costumes of every monster and, well, just monster that they have unmasked over the years. And the pterodactyl ghost lands there. And so what we perceive is that the Mystery Inc. gang is like, hey, we're here to, show off everything that we've done in the past. But what they don't know, but we, the audience, do know, is that the pterodactyl ghost that is on display in the museum is actually real. And, he escapes and kind of all heck breaks loose. And Scooby and Shaggy are kind of incompetent. And the gang's like, Scooby and Shaggy, come on, what's wrong with you guys? And the pterodactyl ghost steals the Black Knight ghost. And I don't think he steals another one. But that leads the Mystery Inc. gang to kind of make fools out of themselves. And the media has a field day with them. So Scooby and Shaggy feel like they have messed up, and they decide to go out on their own and try to investigate what is happening, while the rest of the gang goes to the Wilkinson's Manor. And actually, as I say that, the whole gang goes to Wilkinson's Manor, and they meet the Black Knight ghost in the flesh, and Scooby and Shaggy are on their own trying to find clues, which they kind of become utter failures at. But they do manage to find the Black Knight ghost, which kind of locks them into this room with them, and they just run away, whereas the rest of the gang fights them off. And so that's kind of the first part of the movie. I don't remember exactly what happens after that. Jake, if you want to jump in and help me.
Okay, so we ended. Where did we end? Where did you just end?
The Black Knight goes at the mansion. I don't remember exactly what happens after that.
What does happen? I know they go to the old hideout. Oh, they escape, and the pterodactyls like flying after them.
Is that the end?
Yeah, because they're at the mansion.
Okay, well, I don't really remember. They end up Scooby and Shaggy end up going to the faux ghost. That's right. Okay, all right, I'm back on track. Scooby and Shaggy, while searching for clues, they find a piece of paper that written on it says the faux ghost, which they go to disguised as SD Creepy and SD McCrawley, the two brothers. And so the faux ghost is basically a hideout for all the people that the Mystery Inc. gang have unmasked over the years. And Scooby and Shaggy try to infiltrate there and find out if anyone there knows anything. But lo and behold, nobody does, and everybody wants to kill them because as Scooby is dancing, his afro flies off and their identities are revealed. But as they leave, they meet Seth Green, who plays the curator of the museum and Velma's love interest in the movie, who may or may not at this point be the pterodactyl ghost, or actually the man in the mask that is behind everything. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit. Before Seth Green gets there, he and Velma have a little quote-unquote date where they go to the museum where Velma's wearing this sexy leather pantsuit. But once they get to the museum, all the costumes are gone, and no one knows what happened to them. And again, Freddy messes up, and the media kind of throws it all in his face. And that leads us to Old Man Wilkinson at his mining town, where Scooby and Shaggy are in the basement, and they discover all these potions and blah, 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 blah. And the rest of the gang kind of run in and mess up his real estate deal. But then after that happens, they all go downstairs, and they find this thing which seems to be creating the monsters. And Scooby and Shaggy are like, hey, this is cool. So they start pushing all the buttons and accidentally create the rest of the monsters and out of the costumes that had been stolen. And they let them loose all over the city. So then the gang feels sad about themselves, and they go to their old hideout, and they're like, oh, man, remember when we used to play Frisbee? That was fun. And then because of that, Velma's like, hey, I remember something. And she finds this thing in the old clubhouse that will help them retreat all the monsters back into the costumes. So then they go back to Old Man Wilkinson's old mining town, and they save the day.
And
but
that's where the pterodactyl is.
Yes, the pterodactyl ghost is after that. But we learn that, in fact, it was not Seth Green. It was actually Heather Jasper Howe, the media lady, but it was actually, she's not a real person. It was actually Jonathan Jacobo, the original pterodactyl ghost, who was Old Man Wilkinson's roommate and got the leading part in My Fair Lady. And that about sums up the movie, I think. I know that was kind of all over the place, but thank you all for bearing with me. Jake, would you like to say what you think this movie is about?
Right off the bat, the movie, I feel like, is trying just to break down the established roles that the characters play. Right off the bat.
I would agree with that. And, as we say on this podcast, pretty much every movie is about self-discovery. But in the case of Scooby-Doo 2, Monsters Unleashed, I think this movie is a case of self-rediscovery. As throughout the movie, each member of the gang kind of doubts themselves and has to reckon with the fact that they are, I'm blanking on the word. What makes them unique and may be seen as a downside to others is actually their strengths.
Yes, I agree. I agree that 100% because we see that, especially with Shaggy and Scooby, trying to be real detectives, and we see it just does not work. It's not going to work for them, and it never will.
Although, while they're doing that in the mansion, they do find the clue for the faux ghost. So, did it work? Kind of. But also, Scooby overlooks things that are clearly labeled like secret diary. So, they're obviously not the best at it.
So, before we get too deep into that, let's start at the very beginning. Something I want to make note of is in the very beginning, the opening sequence is from the enemy's perspective.
Right, the pterodactyl ghost.
See the pterodactyl ghost, and it kind of goes between a POV and kind of like a third-person shot between the whole thing.
Yeah, and I really like the opening shot of this movie. Obviously it's a Scooby-Doo movie, so the cinematography is not going to be fantastic, but I really love the way this movie opens.
Yes, and I think that opening kind of symbolizes. This is definitely a man versus inner self movie. Sure, we have the monsters, but really, a lot of the struggle comes internally. Internally within the group, but internally for each member of the group. They each struggle with something like you said.
Well, I'll also say about the monsters, that kind of, I would say, is a part of what you are saying. Because all these monsters are people that they have unmasked in the past, and they were not real, but they've already dealt with all these monsters before. So it's kind of like their past coming back to haunt them in a way. And so the things that they have tried to hide, maybe the things that they are not proud of themselves, are starting to show up. and they have to reckon with that fact.
Reckon with it and kind of, like, not embody, but
They have to
embrace.
accept it.
Yeah, definitely.
And there's a line from the masked man at the beginning of the movie where he says, "This time, you'll be the ones who are unmasked." And then he says, "As the buffoons, you really are," which that I would argue doesn't really happen. But each member of the gang does steadily throughout the movie slowly become unmasked in a way. It's just not the mask that we, as fans of Scooby Doo, are used to.
And it's interesting, if we look at the first movie, where at the beginning of the first movie, the gang breaks up. And again, this whole movie is about them trying to find their place in Mystery Incorporated, but find like their place and their value. Like, what can they offer to the team? And it's interesting that in this movie, each of them tries to break away from that role that they had established in the first movie.
Right. Because, of course, you have Shaggy and Scooby, who are perceived to be incompetent by even the other members of the gang. They feel like they have to become, quote unquote, real detectives. You have Velma, who, is the brain and pretty much, and most incarnations of Scooby Doo is nothing but the brain, but here she has to confront with emotions, which she's not used to. And then you have Fred and Daphne, who kind of come as a pair in most incarnations, although in this movie, I don't think it's clear whether or not that they are dating. But Daphne is called by Heather Jasper Howell. She says, "Are you just a pretty face?" So Daphne has to reckon with the fact that she's more than just beauty. And then Fred, when he's fighting the Black Knight Ghost at the end, he says something along the lines of, "That makes me a wimp." So,
Yes,
and
yeah,
Daphne says that
and
he's
so he
not.
says that, and then the Black Knight says that.
Right.
So they have the same line.
So Fred kind of has a reckon with the fact that, you don't have to be this macho man
Yeah,
to be the hero.
yeah. And you made the point of Daphne is trying to break away from just being the looks, which I agree with. But she also says, when she's talking to Shaggy and Scooby, I believe, about like the media, she says, "Image is everything." So even though she's trying to break away from, her perceived image, who she is, as in relation to the group, um, yes, she says image is everything. She's saying that appearance matters more than what you actually do.
That is actually the first thing I wrote down in my notes, that Daphne said image is everything. Because I think that is the theme. If you could narrow it down to one theme, I think image is everything is the theme that covers not just this movie, but every piece of Scooby-Doo media ever made. Because, of course, for most incarnations of Scooby-Doo, the monsters that the gang investigates and captures are not actually monsters. They are people dressed in costumes. In
Right.
which case, the image they are presenting is that they're this horrifying creature, when really they're just normal people. So,
Yeah.
image in the Scooby-Doo franchise is something that I think is very important.
And I think it plays more specifically, definitely to this movie, where we have this battle with the media and
Right.
misrepresentation from the media. So I know there's two lines that Fred says in context that makes sense, but then Heather Jasper Jones or whatever her name is takes those out of context. One of them is, "I think Coolsville sucks," and then what's the other one? Do you remember the other one?
I don't remember, but I think Coolsville sucks is one of my favorite lines in the whole movie.
Yeah.
Oh, he says, "Little old Coolsville can solve their problems without us."
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So in context, when he actually said it, it was like it made sense. But then out of context, it's completely wrong. And so we're talking about the image being everything, and we go back to what the mask guy says. He said, "I'm going to
Oh,
unmask you." And so we learn later that Heather Jasper Jones is the masked figure, which is Jacobo. But She did try to unmask, and I will say that she did, for sure.
I know I would agree with that. The gang was unmasked, but they were able to overcome. And her name is Heather Jasper Howe.
Oh, how? Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting to make the villain of this movie not only Jonathan Jacobo, but also the kind of the face of the media, at least in some sense, because she is the only piece of the media we see in this movie at all, I think.
Yes, her and Nick, yeah.
Which she does successfully turn the citizens of Coolsville against the gang because, of course, at one point there's a large gathering of people like picketing outside of Cool's Mystery Inc.'s base, which is what prompts them to go back to their old base.
Yes.
But in
And
doing so, they find what they need to defeat Jonathan Jacobo. So in a way, this misperception and this image of Mystery Inc. being perceived poorly is what led them to their victory in the end.
yes, and I think that, you know, that Mystery Inc. definitely had gotten away from who they were. And so I would say that it's an unmasking, yes, but it's more of like a resurfacing, maybe, that they had put on these masks, just like the villains they had been trying to catch. They wore these masks. We see in the introduction after the flight of the pterodactyl, um, there's a big red carpet. They're pulling up in a Mystery Inc. limo, and each one of them has their fan group. And so originally, they didn't have a following at all. It wasn't about the people. It was about solving the mystery. And so along the way of their success from the first movie, they definitely lost part of that. And
Well, the
and
first
so
movie kind of takes place in a weird situation because, like you said, they broke up and then at the end they come back together. But I do see what you're saying. After that movie, and they continued to be a gang, they have amassed this large following that now, as many celebrities do, they change themselves to match the persona that people gave to them.
yes. And so now they not only are they having to play against so they are who they are, right? But then they kind of have to exaggerate that for the media. But in that exaggeration, they lose who they truly are.
Right.
And I think the fame definitely got to their head. And so I think, like you're saying, when they go back to the original hideout, that's kind of like that's them going back to what founded Mystery Inc. was.
Well, actually, at the hideout, I think this is when Shaggy says this. Shaggy says, "We'll never be anything except our old goofy selves." So at that point in the movie, I think everyone in the gang has kind of accepted their place, whether they're happy with it or not. At that moment, they have accepted who they really are.
Right, that's what I'm saying, is that they're going back to what solving mysteries was all about.
Right. And it is as seen in the parts immediately after that when the gang individually faces off of each monster. It is kind of their each individual abilities that allows them to defeat the monsters that they are paired with. You have Shaggy and Scooby who first have to fight the minor 49er who has who has the fire breath, who, of course, Shaggy and Scooby decide to fart against, and they burn his face off. And then they also fight the cotton candy glob, which, of course, is no match for them because they just devour him. And then you have Fred and Daphne, who are paired together in almost every piece of Scooby Doo media, who have to fight the 9,000 Volt Ghost and the Black Knight Ghost, and they team up to, defeat those monsters together, which I
Well,
think that's their strong suit.
yes, and what's very interesting is that that pairing is interesting because they are able to defeat the 9,000-volt ghost and the Black Knight by not, I don't want to say like fusing them, but basically putting them together.
Right.
Fred grabs the pole or whatever he's using to fight the Black Knight ghost. He throws it in the 9,000-volt ghost, and they destroy each other. So it's an interesting kind of duality there, is that if the Black Knight represents Fred, and if the 9,000-volt ghost represents Daphne, then we are basically saying they are destructive together, right? But somehow they're able to get past that and kind of have this good relationship.
And it works.
It works a lot better than what happens to the 9,000-volt ghost and the Black Knight.
Well, in both cases, sparks do fly.
Sparks do fly when they're laying on the ground together, and I think that's Fred's moment of clarity. Definitely right there.
Well, that's the line. That's the wimp line.
Yeah. Actually, I think that's both of their kind of like moment of clarity.
His and Daphne's.
Yeah, like they're kind of at their lowest, and then they team up and they beat them. They beat the ghosts.
Right.
And then Shaggy and Scooby's. What is their? I mean, the skeletons are definitely symbolic of them.
Well, but Velma is actually who takes down the skeletons, I think.
I'm trying to remember.
I don't know. They don't have a parallel. They fought the Minor 49er and the Count and Candy Club, in which their, perceptual stupidity and ineptitude is really what gets them past those two monsters, I think.
Yeah. Well, if that's what gets them past everything.
Well, even early, Scooby was just grabbing things because he thought they looked cool. And, he was singing into the toilet brush, but he also found the faux ghost thing. So
yeah.
There's that. And then also going back to, image being everything, you, of course, had the scene where Scooby and Shaggy are drinking all the potions.
Yes.
In the old mining town or whatever. And each potion not only changes their physical appearance, but also their whole personalities.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that. Was something I found was hilarious was when Scooby was Einstein Scooby. I forget exactly what he says, but he says something about a Schwarzeneggian like bodice or something.
Schwarzeneggian oaf.
Yeah. Which I think is pretty funny. That's what he would use because it's when Shaggy is all beefed up.
Right.
Was that conversation? So Shaggy likes being like he likes the muscle, like he likes what did he say? He's like, "Oh, I'm never going back," or something like that.
Yeah.
In this huge Schwarzeneggian oafness. But Scooby kind of understands in his increased intelligence that like he wants to go back to being himself.
Well, yeah, he understands that's not those two incarnations of Scooby and Shaggy are not who they really are. So he knows as the hyper-intelligent Scoob that he was turned into that they must go back in order for the gang to function. Everyone has to serve their role.
Right.
So Scooby and Shaggy can't be super intelligent or buff because that's Velma and Fred's thing.
Yeah. And playing their roles, I think for the most part, didn't Shaggy and Scooby like actually do like most of the discovery?
Probably. They went. I don't remember if them going to the faux ghost actually achieved anything, but they find the mining town on their own, and through drinking the magic potions, they blow up the door into the place where the monsters are being made.
And they uncover the panel.
Right. But, with Shaggy and Scoob, it's kind of a give and take because they were the ones who created the rest of the monsters, singing their greatest detective song.
Dude, that's
That
gonna be
that's
our,
a that's a
that's
bob.
gonna be our thingy. Boom, 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 boom.
But what you said about Shaggy and Scooby, being the only ones, or being the two who did the most to solve the mystery, kind of comes up in the climax when they're scared to do whatever they're supposed to do, and then Velma's like, "Well, I always wanted to be like you guys. You're never afraid to be yourself." And that, I would say, that line is kind of indicative of the thematic climax of the film, because it's saying pretty directly to the audience that in order to succeed, they are going to have to be themselves and nothing else.
And it definitely plays into the idea of like the grass is always greener.
How so?
Well, just because like Shaggy and Scooby want to be like everybody else, want to be like Velma or whatever, and Velma wants to be like Shaggy and Scooby.
Right. It's like
So
you always want what you can't have,
right,
but you
and
need to accept yourself.
well, and I don't think that Shaggy and Scooby kind of understand like that they actually end up doing a lot of like good. They do end up helping. Um, they do end up helping the team a lot, and I think part of that is kind of like don't they like overhear the gang talking about like how like they're like not good. So like in the when the pterodactyl ghost steals the Black Knight ghost,
You know
right?
when they tie him up?
Yeah. They tie him up and they don't tie it right, and so they get hooked, and the pterodactyl ghost is like dragging him around. Um, and one of the gang members say we have to save Shaggy and Scooby, and I think it's Velma who says as usual. And
Right.
so it's like one of those things where like if you say something enough, you'll start to believe it. So even though like Shaggy and Scooby do like a lot of good for the team, a lot of like problem solving, mystery solving that we see in the movie, they repeatedly hear like we're not good enough. We're good. We're like goofy. Like we're not.
Well, yeah, I would say at the very least, the first half of the movie, the gang feels burdened by Shaggy and Scooby, because and right after that part where they don't tie up the pterodactyl ghost and it makes its way off with the Black Knight ghost, they go back to their base, and Shaggy and Scooby are sitting behind the counter talking about how they're screw ups, and the rest of the gang is sitting on the couches, and they are debating whose fault it was because Shuggy and Scabby, oh my god, Shaggy and Scooby messed up.
Right.
Each other member of the gang blame themselves, but they say it's my fault. I shouldn't have told Shaggy and Scooby. Blah 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 blah.
Right. So it's my fault because like they did this.
Right. And I mean, and their ineptitude is shown right after that, because they're like, all right, we're gonna decide not to be screw ups anymore. And Shaggy's like, all right, raise your right paw,
Well,
Scoob.
he said.
Your
Well,
right paw. Your right
Shaggy
paw.
says. Shaggy says we could act like real detectives, and then Scooby laughs. Like he's like, Ree! And then he's
Right.
like, oh,
Because he's
and
not
then
taking
yeah,
them
he's
seriously. Because
like right
Scooby,
ball.
again, like he does when he's the super intellectual, Scooby knows that the gang doesn't work if they are not who they are. And
Yeah.
he's a dog. He's not a person, so he doesn't understand things or perceive things the way that Shaggy and the rest of the gang does. So whenever he says we're screw ups or something along those lines, most of the time he's just repeating what Shaggy or someone else has said to him.
Yeah, and it's almost kind of like there's two things here. One of them, let's get meta. It's almost Shaggy and Scooby are definitely the comedic relief for sure.
Undoubtedly.
And like if you have like a serious movie, if you have a drama that is just straight drama, it's most of the time it's usually like not that good, right? But you need that comedic relief to make it good. So when we talk about the operation of a gang as a whole, if you don't have that silliness, then it doesn't work that well. But then you do have that, and it flows.
Well, even in the old cartoons, if my memory serves me, then Shaggy and Scooby are usually the ones who end up like landing on the ghost or monster somehow and trapping them in the original cartoons. I'm pretty sure that's how it goes. So their ineptitude is their strength, even though, to the outside viewer, it may seem like a weakness.
Well, and it's kind of like the expect the unexpected,
Right.
where it's like they're like goofing off, and, scared or whatever, but that, you know, um, not I don't want to say insanity, but that kind of like inability to kind of predict what they're gonna do definitely serves them.
And for the most part, the people that they take down are, at the very least, smarter than Shaggy and Scooby. A lot of them, I would say, seem to be geniuses.
Yeah,
So the Shaggy and Scooby's kind of aloofness and unpredictability would confuse someone who holds himself to a higher standard. I would very much so say that Jonathan Jacobo and Old Man Wilkins, that might not be his name, but that's what I've been calling him this whole time. So we're going to keep going with that. Jonathan Jacobo and Old Man Wilkins definitely have a superiority complex to the gang. And I would say
yeah,
most of the people, even in the original cartoon and every other piece of Scooby Media, do. Because at the end of every episode, they always say, I would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for you meddling kids and dumb dog. So
right.
even after they have been defeated, their evil plan never comes to fruition. They still belittle the gang, being like, well, I would have gotten away with it if you stupid kids wouldn't have messed it up.
Yeah.
So all of the villains see themselves as higher and better than the Scooby Gang because they're all kids or teenagers in most incarnations. They seem to be adults in this one, but either way, the people they take down still don't hold them to a high regard. So because of that, they constantly underestimate the gang and underestimate Shaggy and Scooby even more, which is what allows them to prevail.
Yeah.
Even when they're at the faux ghost and their disguises fall off, they still make it out of there relatively unscathed. And even though they land in the trash, Scooby immediately happily gulps down a fish skeleton. So he is completely unfazed by anything that anyone could throw at him.
Yeah. And oh god, I forgot what the other thing I was gonna say about that was.
Well, I will also say, and give you a chance to think, maybe you can remember it. While they're dancing in the faux ghost and Scooby's wig afro is flying off, the song that plays in the background is called "Thank You for Letting Me Be
Yes.
Myself,"
Yes. Yes.
which I think, as we talked about with image and this rediscovery of self, that song is very much thematically what this movie is about. And it's in a place where all of the quote unquote monsters that the Scooby Gang has encountered over the years are allowed to walk around freely and just be who they are and not be judged.
Well, and let's talk about the name for a second. Faux ghost, as in AKA fake ghost. And who's going in there? Fake detectives.
Pretending to be real detectives.
Pretending to be real detectives and pretending to be bad boys.
Right. Two things that they are very clearly not. Although there is one lady, I don't remember who it was, but she did seem to, be romantically interested in S.T. McCrawley.
Yes, and Scooby, yes. What you say is like, wanna dance, baby? And Scooby's like, rah! Which can we talk about how coordinated that dance was?
It was amazing.
It is
Beautiful.
fantastic. I gotta give props to all those baddies because like that was
They got
impressive.
moves, man.
I mean, I could not do that if I spent a year trying to do that. So it's interesting. Yeah, so
So
it's interesting that they go to the faux ghost is what the name is. Um, And obviously that's a nod to not only, what Shaggy and Scooby are going to do, but it's also in reference to the very nature of the criminals, or whatever you want to call them, that the gang captures, is that they are fake ghosts.
Well, and even right after that, you run into Patrick, is Seth Green's character name. I just remembered that. You run into Patrick, Scooby and Shaggy run into Patrick, who claims to be, pretending to be something he's not, interrogating one of the members of the faux ghost, which Shaggy and Scooby don't believe immediately, but it is revealed later that he was a good guy. So we, the audience, can understand and believe that he was pretending there. So it seems that every character that we see around that area pretends to be something that they are not.
Yeah. Well, and I love that scene with Patrick and Shaggy, because number one, I want to make mention of how much taller Matthew Lillard is. And what's his name? Sean Green?
Seth Green.
Seth Green. Like the camera work in that is strange, because really, I mean, like, when we see them side by side, there's not a whole lot of difference in height. But when we take the shot with the conversation, we see Seth Green, and then we see Matthew Lillard, and it looks like there's a huge difference in height.
I did not notice that, but if that is the case, and I'm not calling you a liar, so we're going to pretend we're going to keep going as if it is, then maybe, in film, we use height and perception to make people seem bigger and badder than they really are. Take, for instance, in Back to the Future, you see an inferior shot of Biff looking down into the camera, and then you see a shot of Marty McFly looking up into the camera, signifying that Marty McFly is looking up into Biff. So if what you're saying is true about Shaggy being perceived as higher than Patrick, then maybe the director was trying to show that Shaggy is a better person, maybe morally, or maybe just a more intimidating character than Patrick, even though in that moment it is very clear that Patrick is kind of crazy. Intimidating. So if that is the case, that's an interesting thing to note, especially that since Shaggy and Scooby are characterized so stupidly, throughout the movie.
Yeah, and he keeps scaring me. He goes, bah! And they get scared.
We got to make like your personality and split.
Yes. What a great line coming from like a children's movie. Like,
this movie has a lot of great lines, I have to say. One of my favorites is when I don't know if it's right after they created the monsters or not, but it's in that area with the disc thing, and Shaggy and Scooby are shared. So Scooby slaps Shaggy, and Shaggy's like, "I needed that," and Scooby slaps him again. He's like, "I needed that," and then Scooby slaps him again, and he goes, "You're pushing your luck, Scooby."
Pow! Yeah, his voice gets real deep.
I love that. Which again, maybe Shaggy's voice is really that deep. And
Matthew,
he's presenting the image that of this high-pitched guy to throw everyone off the scent. I don't know. I didn't think about that earlier.
Well, Matthew Lillard, when he was talking about an interview, he said like he screamed a bunch before they started recording to get like his voice raspy.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Which, if you want to get meta, talking about perception and stuff, maybe that's like, oh, let's even get more meta, because like, if Shaggy didn't sound like the way he sounded, like if he wasn't like this all the time, then we would be like, oh, we don't like Shaggy, like we don't like what's happening, like we don't, you know what I'm saying?
Right. Well, and I think the characters in the film and in the respective other Scooby media would probably take him more seriously.
Yeah, but that would definitely be playing against who he is as he puts out
his characterizations. It wouldn't be in line with that. I think we've pretty much discussed image almost as much as we can, but there's another thing I want to touch on, and that's this movie's focus on love. which factors into Velma and her perception of herself. But there's this
Yeah.
great line from Daphne when she's trying to get Velma to come downstairs and be with Patrick. Daphne says, the object of a healthy relationship is to never let the other person see your flaws, which does factor into that perception of image is everything. So Daphne seems to believe that, again, image is everything. And Heather Jasper House says to her, are you nothing but a pretty face? She doesn't want her flaws to be out in the open because she believes that compromises her. But as this movie shows by the end, the flaws is what makes you, this is going to sound a little corny, but the flaws are what make you beautiful. So you need to accept your flaws, and they will make you a better person because of that. And it is not until Velma accepts the irrationality of emotion that she is able to see Patrick for who he really is. When in that moment that she does that, she's about to fall to her death, hanging off of the bridge.
And not only does not only do your flaws make you beautiful, but your flaws are what, getting corny again, make you you. They give you your uniqueness. Without Shaggy and Scooby's flaws, then we wouldn't have their success. If we didn't have Fred's bravado, then the team might be disorganized. If we didn't have Velma's overwhelming logical mind, then we wouldn't have all like the smart stuff that happens. And if we didn't have Daphne's idea of like image, then maybe they wouldn't be like popular.
Well, even literally Daphne's holding importance of image comes into play when they are trapped in the little ball thing at the mansion. She uses like this pore strip, I think it is, to get the thumbprint to unlock the ball thing. And Velma's like, Daphne, is this really the time for makeup? And I don't know what Daphne says back, but it shows that even within the gang, they're like, oh, Daphne's doing the pretty girl thing again. And the things that make them unique and their flaws are what put them above the people who reside at the faux ghost. Because, as I said earlier, they all have a superiority complex. So they believe that they can have no flaws in order to be successful. Yet, the Scooby Gang, in almost every single piece of Scooby media, defeats the monster at the end of the episode or the movie or whatever. So it is clear that the Scooby-Doo gang, albeit may they be flawed and not as intelligent or not as good as the people they are battling, they always come out on top because they are who they are and they're not afraid.
Embrace that. Yeah.
All right, Jake. So that's all I have on Scooby-Doo 2. Do you have anything else?
Let me look right quick. Well, there's two things that I want to bring up from the very beginning, kind of that introduction. So I love so every character has their kind of introduction. When they're walking the red carpet, they each have their little groups, and Fred is funny, Velma is funny, Daphne is funny, but Shaggy, he does like a little sniff, and then he turns to the group who are obviously stoners, and he's like, "Hey!" I love that Shaggy is almost certainly a stoner, but we never actually see him being a stoner.
All right, well, I have two things to say. Well, three things, I guess. In the first movie, it's more blatantly said, not overtly, but there's this in the first movie. You have the scene where he's like eating just a ton of food in the van, and there's like all this smoke that comes out of the van when somebody opens it up. And then you see Ela Fisher's character on the plane. Her name is Mary Jane. And Shaggy's like that's my favorite name. But also, the original voice actor of Shaggy, Casey Kasem, openly hates the fact that they made Shaggy a stoner in these two movies. He does not like it at all.
But it's never explicitly said.
No, but it's clear. It's very clear.
Yes, it is. And the other
And the
one
third thing
is
I have to say is that there's a TV show called Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law. And I watched an episode the other day where Shaggy and Scooby get pulled over for supposedly intoxicated driving because they were high,
yeah.
and the police officer arrests them, and then they end up winning their court case because the rest of the gang is like, no, they weren't high, they're just stupid, and they just start laughing again. So I love that.
So yeah, never explicitly said, but it's clear as day. And then Scooby's one is funny. Obviously, they're gonna be dogs, and they bark in their subtitles. But the Pomeranian, the subtitles for the Pomeranian say "tug on my chew toy."
Oh yeah, baby. We know what that means.
Oh, we know exactly what that means. So, I'm just gonna leave. I'm gonna leave y'all with that. That's gonna
Yeah,
be. That's it.
think about that for a little bit. Chew on that, tug on that chew toy, and think about Scooby Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed. Jake, would you like to tell the people where they can get in contact with us if they have any recommendations?
Yep. Any comments, recommendation, cries of outrage? If you just want to tell me that you hate my voice and that we need to get better mics, you can do that on Twitter at PacinoPod, or you can shoot us an email at PacinoPodcast@gmail.com.
All right, well, I think that's all we have for this week. So I'm going to leave you with a stout and sauerkraut.
Stout and sauerkraut.
All right, do you know how to end the recording?
Yeah.